Okay, in this video, we continue our discussion of ARC Section 90A for the review of financial statements. And in this particular video, we'll discuss what to do when there are subsequent events and subsequently discovered facts. So, subsequent to the date of the financial statement. So, first we'll discuss generally about subsequent events, and then we'll look at subsequently discovered facts that become known to us before the report release date, and then subsequently discovered facts that become known to us after the report release date. And so each of those has a few different requirements. So we see here that when evidence or information that subsequent events that require adjustment of or disclosure and the financial statements comes to our attention, then we should request that management consider whether that event was appropriately disclosed and reflected in the financial statements in accordance with the financial reporting framework that they're reporting under. And so if we determine that the subsequent event is not adequately accounted for, then or disclosed in the notes to the financial statements, then we should follow the guidance in paragraphs 56 through 60. And so we did these paragraphs in a different video, but basically that's the discussion over departures from the applicable financial reporting framework. So we would need to disclose it in our accounts review report in a separate paragraph, or if it's too pervasive of a departure, then possibly withdraw from the engagement. So let's first look at the subsequently discovered facts that become known to us before the report release date. So we're going along in our procedures and our review before we've actually issued our report, and we come across some situations that have happened after the organization or the entity's year end that we're reviewing, but that are also important to the financial statements as of or within that year that we're reporting on. So it says here that we're not required to perform any review procedures regarding financial statements after the date of our review report. However, if a subsequently discovered fact becomes known to us before we release the accounts report, then we should discuss that matter with management and those charged with governance if that's appropriate. We should also determine whether the financial statements need revision, and if so, we should ask management if they intend to address the matter in the financial statements. And so if it turns out that management does revise the financial statements, then we should perform our review procedures necessary in the circumstances on that revision. So make sure that the revision that they made is appropriate given the circumstances. And we should also consider dating the accounts review report as of a later date, or include an additional date in our review report on the revised financial statements that is limited to the revision. And that's what we call dual dating the accounts review report for the revision. So we would have one date that says we reviewed the financial statements up to that date, and then a second date that says, but we reviewed a revision up until that second date. And this was if management revised their financial statements and disclosures to reflect that subsequent event. But if it turns out the management did not revise their financial statements in the circumstances, and we believe that they need to be revised, then we should modify our accounts review report as appropriate. And that might be, as we discussed here, 56 through 60, a departure from the applicable financial reporting framework. So now let's talk about subsequently discovered facts that become known to us after the report release date. So we've already released our accounts report, but then we become aware of some new information that affects the year that we reviewed. And if that's the case, we should discuss the matter with management and, when appropriate, those charged with governance, and we should determine whether the financial statements need revision, and if so, we need to inquire how management intends to address the matter in the financial statements. And so if management does revise the financial statements, then we should apply the requirements of paragraph 72, and that was this one related to dating the review report. And if, secondly, if the end of the year the client had given our accountant's review report to third parties after we released it the first time, then we need to make sure that management has given those third parties the new accountant's review report that reflects the revision. And so management does not inform those third parties that have received the review report about the situation, then we should apply the requirements of 76, which we'll get to in a second. And thirdly, these two items were if the revision makes sense and the disclosures were appropriate, we decided. But if it turns out that the revision makes us, in our judgment, revise our conclusion on the original financial statements, then we need to disclose an emphasis of a matter paragraph in accordance with 52 and 353, which we did a video on that earlier, so you can go back to that section. But within this emphasis of a matter paragraph, we need to include 3 points. One of those is the date of the accountant's previous report before we've made this revision, a description of the revision, and the substantive reasons for the revisions. And next we'll discuss 76, which is what we should do when management doesn't appropriately revise the financial statements in a way that we felt is necessary. So if management does not revise the financial statements in circumstances that we believe needed to be revised, then we should notify management and those charged with governance if that's appropriate. And we should tell them not to make the reviewed financial statements available to third parties if they haven't given them to third parties yet. And they shouldn't give them to third parties before the necessary revisions have been made and a new accounts review report on the revised financial statements has been provided. And so if management or those charged with governance do not heed this requirement and they go ahead and send the financial statements and accounts review report to the third parties without our permission, then we should apply section 76B, which is this one, It says that if the reviewed financial statements have been made available to third parties, we should assess whether the steps taken by management are timely and appropriate to ensure that anyone in receipt of those reviewed financial statements is informed of the situation where we had advised them to revise the financial statements, including that the reviewed financial statements are not to be used. And if management does not take necessary steps, then we should apply the requirements of 77. And so if management does not take the necessary steps to ensure that anyone in receipt of the financial statements is informed of the situation, then we should notify management, those charged with governance, that we will seek to prevent future use of the accounts review report. And so if despite our notifications to management that they shouldn't use the accounts review report and shouldn't send it to third parties without their understanding of the situation, then we should take appropriate action to seek to prevent use of our review report. And so we've got some explanatory material here to help us understand what to do in these situations, so we can go down to those sections. But the gist of this is that we may come across situations through our accounts review engagement, and even after we've issued the review report, we might come across situations that would make us believe that the financial statements should be revised or disclosures should be made to adjust or explain certain items. And if that's the case, we would want management to make those revisions in the financial statements or the disclosures in the footnotes. And if they don't, then we should include an emphasis of a matter paragraph in our accounts review report that explains the situation, that there's a departure from the financial reporting framework, and that users of the financial statement should be aware of it. But if we learn of this new set of facts after we've already issued our accounts review report, then we would want management not to provide the previous review report and financial statements to third parties, because our review report would be incorrect and the financial statements would not be in compliance with the applicable financial reporting framework. But if it turns out that they do send the prior accounts review report and financial statements to third parties, then we would ask that they retract them or at least inform the third parties of the situation. And if they don't, we need to take it upon ourselves to make it known to the third parties that there should be revisions to that old report and to see our new report. So let's go down to some of the explanatory material here to get a better understanding. Okay, so now we're down in subsequent events and subsequently discovered facts in the explanatory material section. And so it says we might come across subsequent events or subsequently discovered facts in a variety of ways, and a few of those might be during performance of our review procedures, and also subsequent to the date of the accounts review report, but prior to the release of the report. So before the report date and after the report date. So regarding subsequently discovered facts that become known to us after the report release date, a few items of discussion here. It says that new information may come to our attention that had such information been known to us before or at the date of our review report, it would have caused us to revise our review report. And if that information comes known to us after the report release date, then the requirements that we discussed above apply. And even if we have withdrawn, or rather, these requirements apply even if we had withdrawn or been discharged from the engagement. So we need to still perform these steps to ensure that the previous report is not misunderstood by third parties. Because of the variety of conditions that might be encountered in relation to subsequent events, the specific procedures or actions to be taken in particular may vary somewhat in light of circumstances. For example, when we're trying to determine whether the financial statements need to be revised based on these subsequent events, we might consider, in addition to the requirements of the applicable financial reporting framework, whether we believe persons are currently using or likely to use the financial statements who would attach importance to the subsequently discovered facts. So we need to determine if these subsequent events or facts are material to the users of the financial statements. We might also consider the time elapsed since the financial statements were issued and the date of the accounts review report released and any legal implications. So if it's been a really long time, maybe something that happened 3 years ago and it's long since in the past, maybe it wouldn't be material to users of the financial statements. And so we remember that we need to make sure that management sort of retract the financial statements that it had previously sent to third parties, or it takes steps not to send those previous financial statements that had not been revised to third parties. And so management might take the following steps to make that happen. They might notify anyone who is known to be using or likely to use the financial statements. Also, they might issue, as soon as practicable, revised financial statements with the appropriate disclosure of the matter. And they might also disclose this matter in the subsequent period's financial statements. But if it turns out that management made the reviewed financial statements available to third parties despite our notification not to do so, or if we believe that management or those charged with governance have failed to take the necessary steps to prevent the use of the accounts review report on the previously issued financial statements, despite our prior notification, that we will seek to take action to prevent that use, then our course of action depends on our legal and ethical rights and obligations. So we might consider it appropriate to seek legal advice, because due to our confidentiality and ethical requirements, it might not be appropriate to reach out to all of the users of our clients' financial statements or behind their backs, sort of to alert them of that. So we need to make sure of the legal requirements of that before we take any certain actions. But we do have some actions that we could take to prevent the review report, and those actions that we take might depend on our degree of certainty of our knowledge that persons or entities exist who are currently using or will use the financial statement, who would attach importance to that information. And to that end, we might consider taking the following steps. To the extent applicable, we might notify management and those charged with governance that the accounts review report is not to be used. Then we might notify regulatory agencies having jurisdiction over the entity that the accounts review report is not to be used. And finally, we might notify anyone known to us to be using the financial statements that the accounts review report is not to be used. And so this might be an individual notification to stockholders or investors, the regulatory agency, etc. And also, depending on the circumstances, if we're able to determine that the financial statements need revision, then our notification to anyone in receipt of the financial statements may, if permitted by law, regulation, and relevant ethical requirements, have these two qualities. It could include a description of the nature of the matter and its effect on the financial statements. And we would want to avoid comments concerning the conduct or the motives of any person. We need to just state the facts. We also might need to describe the effect that the matter would have had on our review report if it had been known to us at the date of the report. And so finally, if we're not able to determine whether the financial statements need revision, then we need to notify anyone in receipt of the reviewed financial statements that the accounts review report is not to be used. And this may not be permitted by law, or rather a specific description of the matter might not be permitted to be detailed in the notification, but we just need to high level tell the users of the financial statements that our accounts review report should not be used.